Hello and welcome to the first edition of Locked On Irish with me. Tyler Wojak is the new host. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about this show and what to expect going forward. And then I'll explain what Notre Dame's very public, and some might say infamous search for a new offensive coordinator really told us about the football program. All that and more coming up next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, thank you for joining us here at Locked On Irish. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, you can watch a show on YouTube as well. Whether you're watching or listening, please subscribe to the show and give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Irish and on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. I've got the YouTube page pulled up right now, and it literally has 0 subscribers. 0. We're starting from scratch here. So please get over to YouTube now and be one of the first to subscribe. First and foremost, I just want to say I really appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in to see what this new show is all about. I'm going to lay it all out here at the beginning, and then we can dive into the football talk because, let's be honest, that's what you're really here for. Some of you might be here from some of my past work, but I'm guessing most of you are wondering, who the hell is this guy? And honestly, that's a fair question. So I'll try to answer that now, give you a quick rundown of my background, and hopefully you don't find me too insufferable so you want to join me along for this ride because I'm super excited about it. So as I said at the top, my name is Tyler Wojak, and like most of you, I'm a diehard Notre Dame fan. I've been that way pretty much since the moment I came out of the womb. Back then, my dad decided it was necessary to pass down a lifetime of pain and misery he experienced as a Notre Dame and Cleveland sports fan down to me so I could suffer with him for the rest of our lives. Gonna be honest, I didn't have a ton of say in the moment, but I ran with it, and there's really no turning back now. My family eventually moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and the Derby City is always going to be home to me, so if I say I'm from Louisville, that's why. The first Notre Dame football game I ever attended was on November 8th, 2003. I was 7 years old. The Irish were 2-6 on the year up to that point, and they needed a game-winning field goal at the end of regulation to beat Navy. That was before Navy was good. That was back when they were just god-awful. Well, I guess they kind of are now, but you get my point here. The reason I bring that up is because it was the day I fell in love with Notre Dame, the place, and not just the football program. To be honest, most rational humans would probably fall out of love with the football team during that era, but not me, and I'm guessing not you either if you're listening to this. Now, if you could give a verbal commitment to a school as a 7-year-old, I would have done it that day because from that point forward, practically all I could ever think about was how badly I wanted to go to Notre Dame when it came time for undergrad. The thing about verbal commitments, though, whether you're 7 years old or 17, is that both parties have to be interested. And unfortunately for me, that wasn't always the case. I got denied from Notre Dame out of high school and reluctantly decided to spend my freshman year at Holy Cross because it gave me the best chance to transfer into Notre Dame as a sophomore. That decision paid off a year later when I was finally granted admission. Now, whether or not the admissions office came to that decision because of merit or because they simply got so sick of dealing with me over the years is still up for debate. So yeah, I mean, I technically followed the Rudy route to get into Notre Dame, but instead of walking onto the actual football team, I took my talents to the Inter Hall field, which is slightly less glamorous. They might not make a movie about it, but I got to say, it did culminate in my dorm winning a championship at Notre Dame Stadium my senior year. No big deal. Shout out Dylan Hall, by the way. Anyways, I graduated from Notre Dame in May of 2018. My first job out of college was as a content associate at the ESPN headquarters in the booming metropolis that is Bristol, Connecticut. And my first assignment at the Worldwide Leader was working on Scott Van Pelt's SportsCenter show before eventually landing on College Game Day, which I worked on during the 2019 and 2020 seasons. Back then, being able to travel around the country with that show and that crew while covering some of the biggest games in the sport was honestly a dream come true for me. And that opportunity helped me land my current job at Fox Sports in Los Angeles, working as a producer for our college football talent over here. So, as you could probably tell, I love college football. I love everything about it. Well, almost everything. But the opportunity to cover the sport for the past 5 seasons at the 2 major sports networks has been incredible. But as much as I love college football as a whole, my first love was Notre Dame football, and that sentiment has only grown stronger with time. So as some of you already know, 3 years ago, I started a podcast called Sons of Saturday Irish with my good friend and future guest on the show, by the way, Luke Smith, to talk all things Notre Dame football. We had an absolute blast doing that show, and the work we did is a big reason why I'm here with you today for the launch of Locked On Irish. I'm so grateful to Zach Blackerby, Tom Lee, and everyone else here at the Locked On Podcast Network for hiring me to be the host of their Notre Dame channel. The Locked On mantra is your team every day, and that's exactly what you're going to get with this show. We're going to release a new episode of Locked On Irish every Monday through Friday, year-round, covering Notre Dame football with some basketball and maybe even some baseball mixed in as well. So whether it's breaking down the action on Saturdays in the fall, diving into recruiting, the never-ending coaching carousel, whatever the case may be, we will have you covered here at Locked On Irish. Each episode will be around 25 to 30 minutes, so it's perfect for your morning commute to work, school, or if you're out walking the dog, whatever the case may be. These episodes will be short, hyper-focused, and easily digestible for you to get your day started. I want this to be the best Notre Dame podcast out there, point blank. But in order to do so, I need to hear from you, because the show isn't about me, it's about you, and making this the best experience possible so you continue to make this your first listen every day. I feel like I'm just like you in a lot of ways. If you graduated from Notre Dame, I can relate to your experience as an alum. If you didn't go to school there, I know what that's like too. Like I said earlier, the main reason I fell in love with Notre Dame at such a young age is because my dad was a huge fan of the football program, which is something he inherited from his dad. Neither of them went to school at Notre Dame. I'm the only person in my family who was fortunate enough to actually go to school there, but to be honest, I think my mom has grown to love the University of Notre Dame more than any person on the planet. I'm serious. And she graduated from Akron, so believe me, I get it. I spend my days covering college football for a national network, and now I'll spend my nights doing this show for you. It's not always going to be just me running solo either. I'm going to be joined by a rotating cast of guests, including some of the best reporters on the Notre Dame beat, bloggers who cover the team, national analysts, and former players to provide you with the best insights, interviews, news, and perspectives on the Fighting Irish. Plus, you can be part of the show as well. Right now, the plan is to do a mailbag episode every Friday where you can ask anything you want, and we'll talk it about on the show. Mailbag, completely original idea by me, never been done before in the history of radio or TV. It all started here. So please, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you're tuning in from, and hit me up on social media to let me know your thoughts. You can find the show account on Twitter at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. My personal Twitter account is at Tyler Wojak. That's at Tyler, Wojciak. Tell me what you want to hear more of, what you want to hear less of. I want as much feedback as possible so I can continue to learn and grow the show in a way that satisfies what you want as the viewer. All right, that's enough about me. Let's talk some ball now, shall we? Coming up next, why everyone, myself included, might have just been wrong about the Notre Dame offensive coordinator search. I'll answer that next, but first, I want to tell you about Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories, then you got to try a Built Bar. If you're like me where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. You got to try a Built Bar. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious, you won't even think they're good for you. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And if you're not into real chocolate, well, I don't know, man. I got some questions for you. They come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. Personally, I'm a peanut butter brownie guy, but that's just me. These bars taste like candy, but only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, with a whopping 17 grams of protein. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your next order. And by the way, you don't need to wait around to get a box. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. So head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in, grab a 13-bar box, and thank me later. I promise you won't regret it. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen every day. Make sure you go check out our brand new podcast that's Locked On College Basketball. It's everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. That's Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So, up until February 2nd, Notre Dame was having a pretty solid offseason. The biggest news up to that point, obviously, was that the Irish were able to pick up the ACC career leader in touchdown passes thrown via the transfer portal in Sam Hartman. Hartman was considered the top player to enter the portal by pretty much every ranking put out there. So the fact Notre Dame was able to convince Hartman to spend his last year in college wearing the blue and gold was a massive win for the program. Plus, they added 3 other quality grad transfers that project to be important contributors in 2023. At the time, no important players had decided to leave the portal, and the coaching staff looked like it was going to remain intact. Everything was going good. And outside of the Peyton Bowen saga that sort of cast a black cloud over the National Signing Day, everything on the recruiting trail was looking pretty good too. And then it happened. Alabama flew its private jet into South Bend. They picked up Tommy Rees and his fiance, and then by the following afternoon, Notre Dame needed a new offensive coordinator. And after that, all hell broke loose. You know, you guys know all of this already, but I think it's important to point out that up until Rees left, things were actually going pretty good for Notre Dame, and everyone was happy for the most part. So then the search starts, and you know what happens, right? Kansas State offensive coordinator Colin Klein comes in for the first in-person interview. He either turns it down or never gets the offer in the first place, depending on who you want to believe. And based on some of the reporting that came out afterward, it sounded like a big part of it had to do with the fact that Klein made a terrible first impression with the Notre Dame quarterback room. So whatever, the fan base was able to move on from that pretty quickly. Side note on Klein, though, that's got to be a pretty tough pill to swallow, right? You fly all the way from Manhattan, Kansas to South Bend just to completely botch your interaction with a few 18 to 24-year-olds. That's like when the substitute teacher comes in and manages to butcher every single person's name while taking attendance. I think substitute teachers were like 0 and 182 when trying to pronounce my last name, so I would at least give them the benefit of the doubt, but my classmates weren't always so kind when it happened to them. At least for Klein, he could leave and never have to deal with them again, while the sub would then have to try and maintain order in a classroom for another 60 minutes after that. Good luck with that, man. Substitute teachers, I do not envy you. But back to the point here. That brings us to the Andy Ludwig debacle, because from the moment the picture of Freeman, Ludwig, and Gerad Parker sitting together at the men's hockey game made its way to social media, everyone in the college football world seemed to think it was a done deal that Andy Ludwig was going to leave Utah to come to Notre Dame and become the new offensive coordinator, right? I mean, that's definitely how I interpreted it. I was actually in Spain with my family at the time. When I saw that, I was like, sweet. Now I don't have to worry about this for the rest of the trip. Great. Fast forward a couple days, and ESPN's Pete Thamel tweets out that Andy Ludwig is not going to take the job at Notre Dame, and the buyout was a, quote, obstacle in the discussions, end quote, and the search continued. In that moment, I, like a lot of people, assumed that meant that Notre Dame wasn't willing to pay the reported $2.8 million buyout in Ludwig's contract, so I was pissed off. I was also about to embark on 23 straight hours of international travel back to the United States, so it's a pretty horrid mood to begin with, but still, I reacted to this pretty negatively, to say the least, and I certainly wasn't alone. A lot of people jumped to different conclusions, and none of it was a good look for Notre Dame. But were we all just wrong? Now, I'm not saying that Notre Dame was completely innocent in this whole thing and that they handled this perfectly. Not at all, actually. We'll probably never know exactly what went down, but based on what Marcus Freeman and Jack Swarbrick have said publicly, in addition to the reporting that's come out afterward by people on the Notre Dame beat and national college football reporters, here's what I think happened. I believe that at some point during the negotiations, Andy Ludwig was ready to put pen to paper and commit to Notre Dame. He was also prepared to bring Utah offensive line coach Jim Harding along with him. At this point in time, I think Notre Dame was still in the process of trying to figure out the logistics necessary to pay the reported $4 million buyout, but Notre Dame probably had every intention of paying it. The number was just higher than they expected, and Swarbrick insinuated that the information they received from Utah pertaining to the buyouts wasn't always crystal clear, to say the least. But in this scenario, Notre Dame didn't have all their ducks in a row when Ludwig was ready to sign, and frankly, that's a problem. That should never have been the case. If Ludwig was ready to sign, Notre Dame should have been ready to go with the papers and the payment plan ready to go. But that's not the case. And by the time Notre Dame had all their stuff sorted out, Ludwig had time to reconsider leaving his home of many years and his longtime friend and Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham, and ultimately, he decided to stay put in Salt Lake City. So, in this scenario, Pete Thamel's report that the buyout was an obstacle is correct. The logistics of the buyout gave time for Ludwig to reconsider. Marcus Freeman and Jack Swarbrick's assurances that Ludwig turned it down would also be true, and fans who are pissed at how Notre Dame handled this whole deal are fair to be upset because the administration was not ready at a time when they should have been. Now, I understand that there are some people out there who refuse to believe this version of events and think the Notre Dame administration was never going to pay the buyout, and everything that's come out in the time since has been spin or an attempt to save face with the public. Look, I can't tell you that you're definitively wrong because neither of us were in the room and know exactly what happened. The only people who do know exactly how it all went down were the parties directly involved. And frankly, none of those parties are listening to this podcast right now. I just have a really difficult time believing that Marcus Freeman, a guy who is as real and as authentic as they come, would openly lie like that in his press conference and essentially act as a puppet for the administration as they attempt to right their wrongs. Plus, Swarbrick has publicly doubled down twice now about Notre Dame's intent to pay the buyout. Can you imagine if Ludwig or anyone from on the Utah side of things came out and said that Swarbrick was lying? The ramifications of that would be way worse than anything he's had to endure from the Notre Dame fan base up to this point. It would be a career killer. So it's just not a risk worth taking by any rational person. And no matter what your thoughts are about Jack Swarbrick as an athletic director, he's not irrational. So what does this all mean? Does it mean that Notre Dame's administration isn't all in on the football program? No, although I do think it's still fair to question the extent of the university's investment in football, but not solely based on this, and that's probably a conversation for another time. Does it mean everyone on the Notre Dame side handled this process perfectly? Nope. I don't think that's the case at all either, which is why I understand why fans are upset with how this all played out. But does it mean that Marcus Freeman was reluctantly forced into promoting from within because he had no other options? No, far from it. Like Tao said, far from it. It really comes down to this. And what was undoubtedly the most important decision Marcus Freeman has made in his coaching career, and maybe the most consequential decision he'll ever make as a coach. He went with a guy who he trusts wholeheartedly. And in my lifetime, I haven't seen the fan base so unified in their beliefs about anything like they are in support for Marcus Freeman. So why wouldn't we trust him now? Coming up next, I'll tell you why Gerad Parker has all the tools he needs to succeed in year one as an offensive coordinator, and he might make us forget about this whole entire process. Now that we've covered Gerad Parker's promotion to offensive coordinator, let's talk about what we should expect from him in year one. Now, despite the fact that Parker is only 42 years old, he's actually been coaching at the Power 5 level for the past 16 years. He spent the better part of 2 seasons at West Virginia as the play caller, but it seems like the specifics of his role there might never be known to us on the outside. He might not have the pedigree that some of us wanted in the next offensive coordinator, but this guy's been around the block, and other coaches who he's worked with and for have spoken quite highly of him in the time since. But in modern college football, what is the most important thing you need in order to be successful? You need talent. That's really what it boils down to the vast majority of the time. Which team has better players? In the case of Notre Dame, they should have better players than pretty much everyone on their schedule next season, save for about 2 to 3 teams. Notre Dame was 10th in the 24/7 Sports team talent composite last season, and they'll be even higher next season with Sam Hartman in tow. So let's start with Hartman. Parker inherits the best quarterback room Notre Dame has had in well over a decade, if not more. Personally, I think Sam Hartman is the best passer Notre Dame has had since Jimmy Clausen, and I know there are some Jimmy Clausen haters out there still, but I don't really understand why. Please go back and watch the offensive line he was dealing with. I vividly remember that game against USC in 2009 when he was getting pressured constantly despite the fact USC was only rushing 3 guys, and he still found a way to fit the ball in some tight windows to guys like Golden Tate and Kyle Rudolph in double coverage because USC was able to drop 8 on practically every play. Anyways, let's get back to the point here. Parker also has a very quality backup in Tyler Buckner, who I genuinely believe will push Hartman for the starting job. Will he win it? Probably not. But that's a pretty good place to be in for the quarterback room when you have such a strong number 2. We saw what happened last year when Notre Dame didn't have a quality backup. Let's move on to the running backs. How many schools have multiple stud running backs like Notre Dame has? I'll give you like Penn State and maybe a couple others, but the list is very small. Notre Dame's 3-headed monster next season at running back puts them at the very top of any running back room in college football, if not the best in the country. Logan Diggs and Audric Estime were incredible by the end of last year, and then you add in what Jadarian Price could provide now that he's back from his torn Achilles injury and what Chris Tyree has shown he can do, plus his ability to catch passes out of the backfield. It's really scary to think about how good that room can be. The only problem Gerad Parker and Dylan McCullough are going to have with that room is how to share the ball amongst them because they're just that good. Oh, and the offensive line that those backs get to run behind, that features 2 surefire future NFL starters in Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, a center in Zeke Correll who really came into form during last season. Even though we aren't exactly sure who's going to fill out the guard positions, I feel confident in whoever lands those spots because Notre Dame has recruited offensive line better than any team in the country in recent years. And yes, Notre Dame needs more production out of their receiving core this year. That's undoubtable. That goes without saying, But that's not going to be nearly as big of an issue this season as it was last season because they just have way more talented guys in the room. They just signed 4 freshman receivers. The year before, they signed 1. I mean, right off the bat, that's good. And they lose Braden Lindsey, which is tough. But hopefully we'll see a guy like Tobias Merriweather make that leap in his sophomore season because I think he was going to make it at the end of his freshman year. Then he had the concussion, sort of took his freshman year off the rails. But again, I have high hopes for the receiver room going into next year. So when you take all that into consideration, I think it's very fair to think that Gerad Parker's offense could finish top 10 in scoring offense in year 1. He's not going to be asked to reinvent the wheel here. He just needs to continue building on the really solid foundation that he inherits. More than anything else, college football is a talent acquisition business. That doesn't only apply to players either. That applies to coaches and everyone else involved with the football program. And Parker has plenty of talent around him to succeed right away. Now, does that mean he was the perfect guy for the job? No. But who really is? I know we all fell in love with Ludwig once it looked like he was going to be the guy for the job, but how many of you honestly knew his name before the reports came out that he was being interviewed? I'm guessing not that many, and that's okay. It's behind us now. But Notre Dame's search for an offensive coordinator taught us an awful lot. We got more insight into what Marcus Freeman wants in an offense than we ever have. We know he wants a run-first, pro-style offense that could be multiple in its formations and tempo. Gerad Parker can do that, and at a high level for the reasons I just mentioned. We know that Marcus Freeman wants to be surrounded by people he trusts, but that doesn't mean he wants to be surrounded by yes men either. But instead, people who have a very clear understanding of his vision for the program and the culture that will enable them to have success. When you're in the process of building a program like Freeman is now, that actually might turn out to be more important than bringing in an outsider who has more experience, but you got to earn their trust. So in the end, that's really what it all comes down to, trust. The Notre Dame administration trusts Marcus Freeman to utilize the resources at his disposal to build a program capable of winning a national championship. Marcus Freeman trusts Gerad Parker to build a high-powered offense that can help him reach the ultimate goal of making it to the mountaintop of college football. And we as fans must trust that each of them, along with everyone else affiliated with the Notre Dame football program, are working together in the same direction to make it happen. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks again for joining me on episode 1. I hope you continue making this your first listen every day. And please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And don't forget to give us a follow on Twitter at LockedOnIrish or on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod. For your second listen, go check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court. Plus, hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape, all on Locked On College Basketball. Available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you guys tomorrow.